Between the British invasion and the Summer of Love, there was a time when American music was trying to figure out just exactly what it was, what made it unique from the rest of the world. Many might answer that in that slim window of time, one of the most important American bands on the scene were the Young Rascals, or the Rascals. They were certainly unique. They were soul and R&B oriented. They knew how to rock a house party, and they were one of the first rock bands to proudly feature the mighty Hammond B3 as its signature instrument. The main voice of the group, and the captain piloting that massive B3, was Felix Cavaliere. Originally a pre-med student, Felix was bitten by the rock and roll bug and found himself working with Joey Dee and the Starlighters. Following this, Cavaliere met the three other musicians with whom he would form the Young Rascals: Eddie Brigati, Dino Dinelli, and Gene Cornish. Between 1966 and 1968, the band reached the top 20 9 times, hitting number 1 3 times, with timeless blue-eyed soul rock classics such as Good Lovin', Groovin', People Gotta Be Free, and many others. 1971 saw the release of the final Rascals album to feature all of the original members, Search and Nearness. The band did, however, reunite in 2012 for a run on Broadway and a national tour, which was produced by Stephen and Maureen Van Zandt. Of course, the group was also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Recently, however, Felix has published a book of his experiences titled Felix Cavaliere's Memoir of a Rascal, and he was kind enough to join me to discuss the book and share some great rock and roll stories and wisdom. You can't tell the story of mid-60s American rock and roll without the Rascals, and the best guy to tell us about it is Felix Cavaliere.
How are you?
Oh, I like that background.
Yeah, man, it's better than nothing. That's what I found. Yeah, how are you? Good?
Good, Felix. How are you?
Man, look at those albums. That's pretty cool, man.
Oh, yeah, man. Hey, listen, in fact, I like to start these things. By the way, thank you so much for joining me today. I thank you.
My pleasure.
And I like to start off. I want to start off with some.
Look at that.
I want to start off with some show and tell. I want you to know where you live here quickly, because I got a lot of stuff to show you real fast. But let's start at the beginning. Whoa. Now, I don't know if you're on this, Joey Dee and the Starlighters.
No, I was a later member of that band, you know. I was like, let me see, I think I was like the third organist, second or third. Second, yeah, probably second, yeah.
So this was this movie. This is a soundtrack.
Yeah, I wasn't with them at that time, yeah.
You were already doing something else.
No, I was still a student at college. I was still there. Yeah, that was. They were a little older than I am.
All right.
I'm happy to say, yeah.
Well, look at this one. Of course, I got some Rascals things to show you, but you know this one. What a cool record. What a funky.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And what a crew you had on this record.
Well, you know, that's the nice thing about recording out of New York City. You know, we have some, amazing. Well, now I live in Nashville. We have the same thing here, but in those days we had really great people around.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, Will Lee, a very young Will Lee was on here from.
Yeah. And he was a sub. He came in, the guitar player that I had was playing bass, and he said, man, I'm really not a bass player, but I got a guy that just moved here from Florida. And oh my God. Yeah, and Will's a dear friend. He's so good.
This looks like almost like the Zoom background that you have now.
I know. I kind of, yeah, I like the woods. Yeah.
Check this out. This isn't a record, but this is something I found in my record collecting travels. This is do you
promo,
recognize this? Yeah, this was a fan club promo, Rascals Volume 1. And what a cool thing this was. And there's all these like really great, hard to find pictures. You guys are advertising Standell amplifiers and everything over here. And just a really cool piece.
Well, that's how it used to be when we had album covers and things like that, and find ways to spend our money too,
Hey, can you tell what's one of my favorite favorite Rascals albums?
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have it in mono. These are all stereo. I don't have a
really?
nice
So
mono.
you're a collector, I guess, huh?
I am. You could say that.
Yeah. I used to have a really nice record collection like that, and unfortunately, I lost them to a fire, So I lost all of mine. I didn't have quite as many as you have, but I had quite a few.
Well, what was it? I'm sure that all of you guys at that time and after the Rascals were over, you all had serious record collections. Was it? How important was that to you? In fact, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, it's interesting. "Good Lovin' was really a Lemmy Be Good and the Olympics tune. It was a cover, but obviously it became a blockbuster for you guys. But from a record collecting and buying perspective, how did you kind of learn about that record? How do you recall the journey of finding out about that song?
Well, I could tell you the story behind that is, in those days, the club owners demanded no originals.
Interesting.
It was taboo. They wanted what they considered to be top 40.
Right.
I kind of stretched that a little bit to mean covers. So, since I really wasn't a big fan of a lot of the top 40 stuff that was out, I would go to this record store. And, in those days, you could go to a record store and play and listen in a little booth as long as you bought something,
Right.
And we also had radio stations. Living in New York, we had a tremendous advantage. Living near New York, I was about 15 minutes north. We had Alan Freed with the beginning of rock and roll, WINS. Sure. We also had Cousin Brucey, WABC. We also had the good guys on WMCA. We had a lot of music. We also had some black stations that, WWRL and WLIB and things like that. So we had a good, really way of checking out stuff. So when I heard something on the radio, I immediately went to the record store and purchased a 45 so I could prove to the club owner, this is not mine.
Right.
This is not original. Can we do it? You know what I mean? Because they just, they just wanted the people to feel comfortable with the songs they were hearing. You know what I mean? And it was really a good idea because, when you think of some of the songs that people write, oh my God, it's like, please spare me, So anyway, that's how I found Good Lovin'. I found it on the radio, went and brought it there. We also found Mustang Sally that way. Prior to Wilson Pickett, we found that. We found a lot of nice things that, I guess they really weren't hits across the board, but they were hits on the R&B stations. So you had to search. Yeah, which I'm sure you did plenty of to get that collection.
I've done some searching, but it's interesting how you say that. I never really thought about that. It's really kind of come full circle where nowadays all anybody really wants to hear are these cover bands and cover groups and tribute bands and stuff like that. There's really not, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter myself, but there aren't really a lot of opportunities for people to, go listen to some new music. So somewhere in the middle, it started that way, it changed, and then now it's kind of back to that. In fact, I was fortunate enough to perform with some of Billy Joel's band members. I played with Liberty DeVito and Richie Canada. And when
I know all those guys. Of course,
I know you know those guys. And I spoke to Liberty, and I'm talking to Liberty because I had interviewed him for this show too, and I wanted to talk about the Beatles and when he played with Paul McCartney and stuff. And all he wanted to talk to me about was how much he loved seeing the Rascals on Long Island as a kid. Yeah. And how nice you guys were to him, and how much he loves Dino Dinelli. And even though I associate you guys with New Jersey, because I'm a New Jersey guy, I'm up here in North Jersey. Tell me about those Long Island roots. And I know you were sort of an upstate New York guy, and a lot of the guys were from Jersey, and you kind of ended up in that Long Island scene. How did that work regionally for you guys?
Well, it worked because of the fact that we were kind of discovered there. We did a show out in the Hamptons in a place called The Barge. Right. Which is where we were discovered. And we kind of got identified with that area, which was fine with me because between New York, New Jersey, and to some degree Connecticut, it stretched to Massachusetts and down to Philly. We had a really strong base. The other thing is that everybody else was English at that time.
Right.
Pretty much. I mean, there was a couple of groups, but nobody was playing what we were playing. You know what I mean? They were mostly like, like, for example, the Beach Boys out in California, they didn't even play their own music. They had session guys, and of course the Byrds. Now the Byrds, the New Yorkers really weren't that into it, but the R&B influence of the Rascals and the fact that three of us were Italians, that area, they just accepted us. I mean, I had one fellow one time. I was down in New York looking for some used records to try on some albums, in the old places they used to have. Right, and he said, "Man, Felix, you don't understand. You made it okay for Italians to have long hair."
Right.
Prior to that, if we tried to look like a Beatle, we got beat up. But now we're trying to look like the Rascals. How about that? So there's a genuine bond that I'm so happy to say we have.
You've got, of course, we're here predominantly to talk about your new book. You've got a memoir out. It's Felix Cavaliere's Memoir of a Rascal, and it's out now. Tell us a little bit about the book. What are people going to learn? What's going to be new to them?
Well, hopefully it'll be new as far as the story of my journey, so to speak, from Pelham, New York to as it says on the cover, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The book started as a result of we did a Broadway show called Once Upon a Dream, which was named after one of our albums, right. And we did press conferences at that time. And during the press conferences, I noticed that everybody had a different answer for the same questions.
Interesting.
And I said, okay, now wait a second. Now, hold on now. I said this before, but did Custer really win or lose that battle? I don't know. We weren't there. So I decided I better write something down before I kind of forget, I was there, know. So I have my story. And then it dawned on me that I've been here for quite a few years, and the Rascal years maybe was 5 or 6 of those decades.
Right.
Maybe I should talk about the rest of my life. And, perhaps somebody might be interested in the transitions that I made from a pre-med student to a musician. Maybe something would tweak somebody's brain to say I had no idea I was going to be a musician, and I ended up here. And it progressed from there. That's how it started.
Right. And what was the experience of writing it, writing that stuff out or getting it out there, however you did it? Was it fun, or was it occasionally like a painful experience to retrace any of the steps of?
I would say it's painful, but, like I said, I left out a lot of the painful things, I really don't think, I don't know, I just really don't think people would be interested. I know that Crosby, Stills and Nash have a book out, and boy, it's brutal. I don't know if you've read it, but...
No, but I just actually had, just a few weeks ago, Graham Nash was my guest on this show.
Oh, yeah, well, Graham's a doll. He's a great man. But the other guys, they're pretty rough. They can be rough, and they certainly were rough on each other. Well, so were we. We still are. It's a sad story. So I left that out.
Yeah.
I just say, hey, man, you know what? If you don't know about that, Google it. You can find it very easily.
Right.
So I just did my journey, and I encapsulated the Rascal years because obviously I enjoyed every moment of it till it ended. And, I just felt that, perhaps, for example, part of my book is about me meeting a guru, Swami Satchidananda, which changed my life completely, and gave me the longevity of my career to be able to function, which, would be not the case for a lot of other people in my age group. But so anyway, that's how it came about. And it was work. I really admire people like John Grisham and Stephen King because, boy, I don't know how they do all those books. I really don't. It's amazing. They must have a certain, a fountain that they tap into that just comes out like candy. I love it.
They crank them out.
Crank them out. It's hard. It's hard work.
Well, as you mentioned, the sort of reunion that you guys had, it didn't quite last. And in fact, I spoke to Graham Nash about this just a few weeks ago, and just kind of talking about different degrees of success in working out that long-term relationship with a band. It's almost like a marriage. It's like a long-term friendship. What have you learned, during your time with those guys that has worked or not worked, or what's been successful? What's been or not? What have you tried to make be successful?
Going back to the guru, basically when you study with a teacher, the main tenets of what he's trying to teach you are the pitfalls of life in terms of mental, physical, and spiritual. You got to keep your body clean. You got to keep your mind clean. And you got to keep your spirit focused. And he said, basically the major enemy of all of us is called ego.
Right.
Well, I think if you take apart all of the aggravations and lawsuits that groups had, it points to the same thing. It's only ego.
Right.
We had some bands have people stealing their wives or stealing their money. We had none of that. It's just the EGO, man. The EGO destroyed all these bands, and it's sad because it's exactly what we were learning, what I learned. You had to overcome to be what you want to be. You got to be kind of like humble, and you got to be like, sincere, and you got to be grateful and loving and giving, and forget about me, 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 me. And that's what happened. I think what happened with our band and with all these other bands.
And it's hard when, it's amazing to look back and think about your ages at the time and the ages of the Beatles, or, you say, oh, Paul McCartney was starting his solo career before I was lucky I had a bank account at that time. But your ages also were such
Absolutely.
We're also immature at those ages. It's a miracle you guys all succeeded in doing what you did.
Well, Paul said that to me many years ago. We met in Memphis. I went to see him at a concert. He said, do you realize, because we all have kids, that were our age then, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And he said, you realize that we were just, 20s.
Right.
And we were going through all that. It's kind of amazing to look back and say, it was an amazing era, and there's no question about it. I'm really proud to be part of it.
You're one of the few performers who are famous for playing the mighty Hammond B3. I'm a keyboard guy. I love a beautiful Hammond.
Really? There you go.
And for those of you that don't know, it's a monstrous beast of an instrument weighing about 500 pounds. And when you guys started, there were some smaller keyboards available. There was a Vox and the Farfisas and stuff. What made you insist on dragging that giant organ around and the rest of the band? Maybe that's why. Maybe that caused some trouble in the band. Everybody had to help you carry that thing around.
Chiropractors love me, you know that. I mean, I'm a big hit in the chiropractic world. The band was really formed, in my mind anyway, around that organ.
Right.
That's why, because I had seen an organ trio in New Rochelle, New York. I saw three gentlemen. One was playing the organ, playing bass, playing rhythm, playing leads, and singing.
Right.
And they had a drummer and a sax, and that was it. It was an orchestra. It was a band. I said, wow. I have to learn this instrument because, wow, I was a keyboard player, I was a piano player, I was brought up classically, and I said, I've got to learn this. And when I did finally put my hands on one, because I couldn't afford it,
right.
I realized what it can do is fill up a room with sound.
Right.
The whole room. I mean, I got the bottom, I got the middle, I got the top. And so we kind of put the group around that. And from a musical point of view, that register that you play your chords in, it covers a lot of the sonority of like voices and horns and strings. It's all in that place.
Right.
So if you don't have those, which obviously we couldn't afford to have many pieces on, it fills up that. Sounds great with voices. Sounds great, like if you're substituting like a horn for it, because we didn't have any synthesizers yet.
Right.
So that really was the basic instrument of the group. And my theory was to have the best musicians I could find. And I did a good job of finding some really good guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so you're kind of saying the group almost was built around the Hammond organ, and those other organs I mentioned are cool organs, but you're right, they don't have the force and gravitas that the Hammond does. That it's just you get the whole, you get those highs and you get those low lows.
Well, the interesting part of the story is, which I think you as a musician would find interesting, is the marriage between the Leslie company, which put the speakers out, and the Hammond company.
Right.
Without the Leslie, that may not be the case, what you just described.
Right.
But, there's a great story about how the Leslie and the Hammond people ultimately got together, because originally Mr. Hammond would not allow the Leslie speaker to be in the room.
Right. He didn't like the connection.
But if you hear a Hammond, which is like through a Fender amp or something,
doesn't work.
It's that Leslie that spins it around the room. That's what did it. The two of them together was what you were describing.
And of course, after the gig, when some friends or the band members would load up the Hammond organ and the van, then you'd say, "Hold on, now we got to go get my Leslie."
Yeah. Well, it still is. I still try to use the B3, even though it's been discontinued since 1972, because it is a kind of a showcase, But there are new ones out now that are pretty darn good. Hammond itself is got a nice couple of portables that are 35, 40 pounds that are pretty nice.
Right. A lot easier, but not as much fun. Not as much.
Not as much fun.
Sid Bernstein, the producer and musical impresario who brought the Beatles to Shea Stadium, was really your first promoter, the Rascals' first promoter. Tell me about that connection and that magical moment in time in 1965 when you and the Beatles you guys had the same promoter. It sounds like things went from the Choo Choo Club in Garfield, New Jersey to the big time really fast.
As I said, we were working in the Hamptons, and a gentleman came in who was a businessman who spotted us. His name was Walter Hyman. And he called up Sid Bernstein and said, I think I found somebody that, these guys, I think they're going to make it. Sid came out. Sid became our manager. So at the same time, actually, they both were our manager for a brief time until Walter decided, okay, I'm going to go on to bigger and better things. And I think he managed Dustin Hoffman and Barbra Streisand, which is not bad, And so anyway, we had a team. But Sid also, as you said, was a promoter for bringing people like the Beatles to the United States. He brought them back twice. He brought them for the Ed Sullivan, and he also brought them for the Shea Stadium. Right. Well, he happened to be our manager at the same time as Shea Stadium. So we got a little bit of publicity at the Shea Stadium show, because what he did is he put on the scoreboard just before they were to come down from their helicopter, the Rascals are coming, the Rascals are coming, the Rascals are coming. And Mr. Epstein, their manager,
right,
didn't like it too much. And he said, if that's not off by the time I count to 5, there's not going to be a show. But it worked.
That's fascinating. I've also spoken to Cousin Brucey about that day, and he was there and walking out with John and everybody was going, what's going to happen over here? Were you guys at that show? I know you didn't perform at that show, but did
we were in the dugout.
You did? You were there?
Oh, yeah, we were watching all this happen, and we saw our name up there. We hadn't really, surfaced yet, as far as the public was concerned. So it was a big deal for us.
Wow. And I mean, as musicians, were you just watching that audience reaction and just saying, could this happen to us? Is this the next step?
Well, let me go back a bit. I don't know if, like I say, if you get this book, you can read the book, you could hear my story. When I was in college, I left to go to the Catskill Mountains for a summer. It was when I met Joey Dee. Joey Dee was a headliner at the hotel I was working at. He was appearing, I was working. And so when they went after the summer to Europe, their organ player quit. And they called me up and asked me to meet them in Europe, which I did. I flew over instead of going back to Syracuse. Well, the opening group for Mr. D and the Starlighters were this unknown group called the Beatles. So I saw the Beatles before they came to the United States, before anybody saw them in America. And I witnessed that hysteria and that unbelievable glow that those guys had from the stage, because you could sense something big was going to happen, So I saw that before they came to the United States, and so I already had a taste of what could be.
Right.
As a matter of fact, that's what made my decision to go into the music business, because, as a musician, when you hear other bands, of course, you put your stamp of approval or disapproval. And I said, man, they're okay. I didn't really think they were a great band. Right. I didn't know how magically they wrote yet, But when they played American music, it was all right. It was okay, I mean, very wooden, But when they did their music, you had to take notice.
Right.
And that's when I said, oh my God, what is that? Like you hear like that, I want to hold your hand, and the way they were syncopating, it was just different, And then the harmony, and I said, well, how about if I put a group together that sings well and plays well? And that was the plan.
It worked. It worked.
It worked very fast too. I don't know if you had a chance to see the Elvis movie.
No, I didn't see it yet. No.
Don't miss it, man.
Yeah.
Because you talk about that outstanding talent.
Right.
That not many human beings, this man had it.
Yeah.
So did Michael Jackson, so did Prince, and so did the Beatles.
Groovin just had a reissue on Mobile Fidelity, a nice audiophile treatment. I haven't had the opportunity to get a copy
good.
Yet. But do you listen to vinyl anymore? Do you care about vinyl, or what kinds of does it? It's having, obviously there's a big resurgence now,
yes.
But did it? Is it something that's? And you just mentioned before you lost a lot of your records in a fire and stuff like that.
I kind of lost my that love and feeling for. I didn't take my albums out of the house fast enough. And unfortunately, my kids at the old house left the fluorescent lights on. I lost everything. But I had, I'd say maybe 1/3 of what you have behind you there. I had a pretty darn good closet full of stuff. I collected, I collected mostly from my own tastes rather than from any type of like this is valuable,
Right.
But now I know they were valuable. So I've kind of shied away from the vinyl.
Yeah. I bet you had some cool stuff. I bet you had some cool test pressings and Rascals test pressings and stuff.
I did. Well, I besides that, yeah, I mean, I had a good collection, and that's why even though there's major pitfalls with Spotify and Apple Music and all that, I can hear just about anything I want to hear. Now, whether I hear the vinyl, quality or not, I have to sacrifice something.
Right, right. It's always a compromise. Your new book features a beautiful Linda McCartney photo on the cover, and can you talk a little bit about that image and any memories you might have of that photo session with Linda?
Well, basically, Linda, who was just one of the sweetest persons I've ever met in my life. She was just lovely. Before she was married to Paul, she used to be a photographer and come around to all the shows, and if anybody really would like to see her work, Google and look. She has these cocktail kind of photo books that are just phenomenal.
Yeah, they're great.
And this is one of them that's in there. And the estate was kind enough to let me use it, which I really appreciate because I think it's a great shot and it brings back, as you say, nothing but warm memories of, that was a long time ago.
Do you remember where it was?
I believe it might have been in New York at the phone booth at one of those clubs, prior to us, making it, so to speak. She came around,
Yeah. So I guess that would have been pre-Paul probably, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. She was doing a lot of photography
Right.
way before she met McCartney.
Lovely, lovely lady. She was just fantastic.
When you were a band, when you guys were riding high, were there other bands that you were close with that you kind of shared a common bond with and had a kind of a working relationship that you got along with that maybe people aren't aware of?
The first group of guys that we hooked up with, basically with the Vagrants. Vagrants had Leslie West in it, because he became part of Mountain.
Before Mountain.
And then, of course, Chris Vanilla Fudge. After that, we got to know Billy Joel. He had a group called the Hassles, which you spoke to Liberty about, and we were around in New York, but we were working a lot. We were kind of like out and about, and didn't get a real good chance to mingle with other bands and things unless we went on the road, and we would go to California, we'd run into Graham Nash and Crosby, and it just was a kind of like a chain of events. That's why when we used to do shows with other bands. Like now I work with the Zombies and the Kinks and the Animals. God, we don't see each other hardly at all anymore. Unless there's like a cruise or something like that. It's really distant. But I miss those days because Mitch Ryder and people like that. It was a smaller business then.
And what do you recall? On that note, what do you recall during those days that really set you guys apart from the others? What was your kind of, maybe the answer is the Hammond B3, I don't know, but what was the special sauce? What was the magic fairy dust that kind of made the Rascals and the Young Rascals who they are?
The R&B influence.
Yeah.
See, we were the first white band on Atlantic Records.
That's right.
And I don't think anybody was hitting what we were hitting at that time. Basically they were, in those days, there was a major difference around the United States of America in music. Like, for example, if you went to, as I mentioned earlier, if you go to California, you're getting the Beach Boys and the Byrds. If you're going to, like, Louisiana, you're getting all Fats Domino, you're getting the New Orleans kind of thing. Right. Detroit, I don't even have to mention, it's the Motown kind of thing. Now, it's all the same. Everything is homogenized around here. There is no, unless you go to a club, and you can go to clubs and you still hear, like, the so-called Minnesota sound that Prince kind of started up there. It's all the same. It's all one total music that they've put out, Live Nation and Clear Channel and all that. They've taken that lovely kind of demographic style away, which was done by where you were. And when you went down south, you heard the most phenomenal, like Almonds and things like that. That was the norm,
Right.
That's kind of gone, and, that's why I was mentioning the Elvis movie, because it shows you where he got his roots from. But I mean, that's the thing. We represented like the in quotes white, blue-eyed soul. I think they call it part of the music. There weren't a lot of bands doing that.
Right.
Everybody was really trying to see how English they could be. How English can we be today, mate?
Right.
And we weren't doing that.
Well, you were influenced again regionally by what you guys were hearing in your own home.
Absolutely.
So
And I'm very, very thankful for that, because we were at the beginning of what was known as rock and roll, and so did Elvis, man. Like I say, when you see that film, you'll see what he was listening to, man, and that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, I heard this. I said, Ray Charles?
right.
Wait a minute. That's not my neighborhood. I got to go find out about this, man, because I never heard anything like that. Well,
Right.
when you never heard anything, like, you seek it. You go out and find it, And if you find it, you go like, oh, my God. Wow, this is so cool, And that's really what happens.
Well, not only that, but you found it and you managed to turn it into something unique, through your own filters. So it's one thing to be inspired by it and to enjoy it and to love it. We all love music that way, but you guys put it together. You put your own spin on it.
Yeah, and we had tremendous help too. I mean, Atlantic Records, even though basically produced the group ourselves. I wanted to produce the group. I didn't want an outside producer to come in, but they provided us with two magnificent, talented human beings in the form of Arif Mardin and Tom Dowd, who were not in charge, but they were there. And not only were they there, but their contribution was just, it was like George Martin with the Beatles. It was just amazing. And so, I always will thank Atlantic Records for giving us the opportunity, seriously, to create and grow.
So you look back on this book, you look back on all these experiences that you've had, and you have a chance to sort of study things in retrospect. What were some of the takeaways that you were grateful for? Some of the wisdom that you kind of rekindled through this book writing process?
Well, as I say, I think the first thing is to just go back and say, like, man, we had a great career. In the beginning, especially, a lot of fun. I mean, what could be better than going out, writing a song, taking it in the studio, recording it, hearing it on the radio, touring? I mean, it was just true. It was a dream come true. Unfortunately, the human element enters that thing, and that's where it doesn't exactly stay fun, Right. But that's the human element. The other thing is just nothing but just bliss, traveling around, being like number one in Hawaii for many, many years, and it just basically was before let's say before Woodstock. Everything was really, really fun. And then, they have these famous events like, when the Stones had that trouble with the riots and all
Altamont,
that,
Yeah, Altamont.
But Woodstock was a major turning point. People do not realize it because, they get all caught up in the, wow, isn't this hip? Isn't this hip? But what happened is the corporations at that time discovered a market. And that was the people, baby boomers.
Right.
And when corporations come into art, it's a very interesting phenomenon because they think they can create what God creates.
Right.
And they can't.
Right.
But they try. And if it doesn't work, they buy it.
Right.
So they bought it. Okay, it's a long story, but if you want to do the history of rock and roll, it started off with a thing called payola.
Sure.
And it ended up with a thing called advertising.
Right.
I rest my case.
Right. Well, Felix, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me today, and thank you for all the wonderful music that you've created throughout the years, and you've been an inspiration. I love your voice, and your playing is just crazy, and thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, if you just send people to FelixCavalieremusic.com if they want to buy that book, or Amazon, and thank you for your time. And I hope to run into you one of these days. We're going to be, I think, in New Jersey sooner or later.
Hey, cool.
All right, my man. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Felix, thanks a lot, man. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.